Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today I've got Blake Kendrick, and we're going to talk about RevOps, or revenue operations. We're going to try and wade our way through what that is and why it's important over the next 20 minutes. Blake, tell everybody where they can get hold of you.
Sure. LinkedIn is a good spot. I'm frequently on LinkedIn trying to comment in different areas and things like that. But I've really leaned into Slack communities lately as well. There's one in particular for centralized for folks for RevOps called RevOps Co-op. And that's been really productive. It's free to join and everyone's really focused. So I found Slack communities to be really fun to lean into now, more so than like LinkedIn groups are a little bit posty, a little bit sharing too much content, but more free-form discussions in those environments, and that's a lot of fun.
I'm in a couple of Slack groups. There can be a little bit of people trying to sell stuff, but it depends how it's managed.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's interesting. There's a lot of really strong community tools that I've seen as some of the new technologies, innovation there, to highlight active members and things like that, and kind of your community leaders and your engaged folks. And it gives admins a lot of control, keep track of those things. But yeah, the moderation is really a strong piece.
So Blake, what's your journey? How did you get here? How did you get to be talking to me about RevOps?
Yeah, I'll try and punch it down to a short timeline. So my origins coming from a place where undergrad I studied psychology, took a little bit of focus in communications. Coming from there, did a brief stint at Comcast. So I was boots on the ground in a cubicle in the retentions department of business services.
Wow.
Moved to a small marketing agency, primarily focusing on email marketing. Then from there, went down to Boston. Started out doing content writing, talked directly to the COO and CEO after a few months and said, hey, the COO is doing a lot of our operational pieces and working on workflows and things like that. I know how to build all those things. Let me do that, and let the COO do his operational stuff. They tried me out, worked there for close to 5 years. That was at Full Funnel. Similar environment as the agency structure. We did outsourced marketing and sales and advisory services, primarily for B2B orgs. And while I was there, I started on that marketing ops journey. Eventually, the market changed a little bit. We changed our offerings a little bit and focused more on sales outsourcing, pure play. And as a result, the operational side, I focused more on the sales ops and looking at process and how those teams can run more efficiently, how we can scale those operations. And then from there, eventually 2 people came in, specialized in marketing operations, sales operations, and I sort of oversaw them, started to lean into data ops and what it looked like to centralize the intelligence from a lot of these portfolio companies into one place, get them into a standardized format so we can really understand performance across our portfolio companies. Worked with a really talented data scientist, Ashwarya Parsi, on that, but helped lead the architecture and things. And after that, Full Funnel had a sister company, Salesworks, that primarily did sales advisory training for reps, for the end users, basically on sales teams, account executives, development reps. And I tried to complement that branch of service with RevOps as a service. And that was back when RevOps really wasn't a buzzword or anything yet. People were like, what do you mean RevOps? But it was really talking about elevating, if the training was talking about the practical deployment of skills and things like that, how do you manage calls, how do you conduct meetings and all that, RevOps was talking to the leadership branch of how do we organize this team from a personnel standpoint and talent standpoint, how do we evaluate and maintain ongoing coaching and skill development.
Because that kind of leads us to the first question, which is, what is RevOps or revenue operations? What is it?
Yeah. Very simply, It is looking at the things that make us dollars and trying to come up with processes of ways to scale that, and the things that lose us dollars, and looking to minimize that as much as possible. So it's ultimately like a risk assessment. It's an ongoing risk assessment over and over, and looking at the different ways that we're spending money and spending time more so, and trying to optimize that to make sure that we're doing it in the best way possible.
And this covers processes like sales, marketing, and if you're, say, working in a SaaS environment, that would also involve the fact that you are carrying on. In effect, there's a renewal probably at some point, and so there's a renewal sale or something like that. So
Yes,
it can include service as well.
yeah, for sure. Success or client delivery, you could say, but it extends even beyond that, right? Those are the core revenue teams. So that's what everybody typically thinks of or typically staffs a RevOps person for to start. But really, the first person I try to get close to and connect with is the finance person, because they're going to be the ultimate say of, hey, we're on track or we're off track in terms of the dollar value. And, I derive from their assessment, like, how do I take what they're seeing and then translate it to actionable change to try and get us back on track if we're off, or keep us, in line for going forward. But it even extends on the other side, to product. There are lots of processes and things like that you can implement, lots of messaging you can try for marketing and sales and success. But ultimately, if there's a flaw that the market is picking up on in the product, you need to highlight that as well. So you need to interact with those teams too. It's really that RevOps ends up being I always treat it as an in-house consultant. I'm beholden to the organization, not necessarily on a particular team, but I'm facilitating those conversations and making everybody aware of, hey, here are some flaws in different areas.
It's interesting because when we talked about this before we came on, you were talking about how you saw yourself as, in effect, like an internal consultant. Because some people have said to me that RevOps is either sales trying to grab hold of marketing, or marketing trying to grab hold of sales, or there being some sort of battle going on between the two foes, to try and grab hold of things and measure things in a particular way. I mean, how do you see that working?
I think that's fair. I think a lot of organizations, when they're starting to dip their toes, and this is usually when you're talking about companies that they might be older and maybe stagnating and looking at innovation or something like that, but usually it's early stage companies. And they're starting to break out, okay, what does our org structure actually have to start to look like at this first layer of, usually around Series A? They start to think about, okay, do we split up the sales team so we're not doing full cycle sales, we do development and pipeline management? Do we break up our marketing team, and is there a research arm versus a client success and sort of market research firm? Once they start looking at that diversity, it becomes really important to revisit the definitions for what everybody's doing and align those definitions with, okay, what's our objective structure? And so, it ends up being a facilitator really for, like, okay, here's where marketing's responsibility is, and here's where the line ends and where sales takes over. And periodically, here's where the overlap is of where we need to have feedback loops and communication going back and forth. So it's a lot of integration between multiple roles and how they're continuously interacting and sending each other information. And then it's about, on the technology side, structuring that data and that feedback and putting it in a way that we can read it and quickly make us, not assumptions, but conclusions from that data.
Because that kind of comes to the why do you need RevOps, and that seems to be about making sure that we're actually measuring the right things and getting the right return for the dollars that we're spending in sales and marketing and revenue generating areas. Would you say that was right?
I think that is right. Yeah. It's not that, leaderships, especially, these are usually storied professionals that they're not just a CEO overnight, except for at the smallest companies where they're founders, right? They've seen a lot of things and they understand the metrics. But the different business environments that you walk into and the different products that you sell, the formula for kind of extracting that information is sometimes more difficult. And so you have to take a new approach to literally information hierarchy. And again, going back on that structured data is like taking what would be just general feedback and conversations and things like that, and putting it into an organized format so you can systematically go through and iteratively improve on things. There's a lot of like buzzwordy jargon there, but it is about structure. And I think that the RevOps person is as much ways a steward of the revenue and the actual money that's moving around, keeping tabs on that organization and on that structure and keeping everyone aligned.
And would you say that, I mean, I've certainly worked in organizations where there's sales operations, and
Yeah.
that's generally about keeping tabs on and measuring and providing governance to sales, whereas RevOps is far wider than that.
Yeah, well, I wrote a little article not too long ago that came about as a question from the RevOps co-op community. People were looking at what's the difference between like sales enablement and sales ops and RevOps, and where does that all fit? And looking at the definition of those roles, sales enablement is really about skills development. It ends up becoming an education-focused role.
Yep.
RevOps is almost like the project manager. It's kind of overlooking everything and aligning everything, and really paying close attention to the OKR structure and whether or not the time being spent is really contributing to the fulfillment of those goals. Sales operations is a little bit more tactical. These are definitely still problem solvers, but they're taking objectives and they're saying, okay, how do I put this into systematic terms? And you usually see sales operations taking over the technology management side of things, at least in the revenue related tech stack. So sales sequencing tools and CRM and call management and coaching, that sort of intelligence around conversations. And they're not only looking at, okay, how do we try to measure these, but also how do we replicate these and how do we scale them? So they're usually coming up with the solutions for those. In earlier stage companies, before you have that breakout of those, three roles and they're working together, RevOps tends to be a generalist, someone who's had varied experience, as I mentioned in my timeline, across multiple of these things. And so they're able to kind of solve some of those things for.
And just for people that are coming into this new, an OKR is a what?
Objective and key result. I would
And
say,
and explain to me what explain to me what an OKR is.
Sure. So Google was really the first company to really pioneer this, or at least publicize it in their environment. And we're talking about an objective would be, let's say, a revenue number, right? You can have quantifiable objectives that you're saying we need to make 10 million by X date or something like that. Yep. I think the way that Google often framed it was in terms of like user participation and things like that too. Their product team would do that. So for YouTube, for example, it would be like, well, we want to get 50 million active users by whatever date. So the objective is that umbrella goal. Well, that can be broken down into multiple components because there are so many variables that can affect the success of that objective. So we have to talk about, okay, how do I isolate a team and a skill set and have them work on one of these key results, which are those subsets of that objective, and make sure that we accomplish that? Maybe it's as simple as looking at, well, if we have this goal for active users, how does the login process work? What's the experience look like there? Is it hard to log in? Do people lose their passwords all the time? Like something like that. You might develop a solution to try and overcome one of those hurdles because now you have people logging in more easily. And now you have a lot more active users. So looking at contributions in that way. But if you have like a revenue number, for example, it could be broken down into further quantifiable objectives, right? Looking at success rates. Yep. How often do we earn meetings or whatever? How can we improve that success rate? And it could be also qualitative key results as well. If you don't have a way to measure that success rate, you need to develop that system for measurement first, and then you can start to measure, and then you could look against it. So, OKRs are extremely important for different organizations, I think. Across the board.
It's a term that comes up a lot, certainly in the startup community, around measurement and really about having setting objectives. And as you say, it's about having this umbrella objective, and then what are the things? So what may be sales and marketing, who could be two separate organizations, what are they going to contribute to that overall objective?
Yeah, right.
And I think that's about creating accountability, isn't it?
It is, yes. I mean, as you're planning that out, you want a way to best leverage the skills. I mean, you're talking about efficiency and, again, time, and making sure you're doing these things correctly. And ideally, you're doing it correctly the first time through. So you want to try and leverage the strongest players for the right tasks every time. And part of that is establishing a communication loop. How do you check in with those people? How do they know what they're supposed to be tasked with? I mentioned before the functional definitions. I think that's one of the first things I revisit when I talk to earlier stage companies. Is I say, okay, you're going through this transition. You're starting to diversify your team. Do they know exactly what they're supposed to do? Because we take a AE that was a full cycle rep, and then you say, okay, you're going to focus on this new thing. They've had a day-to-day, and they've come in and sat at the desk, and they developed a routine. So there's the psychology part plays into that as well, where everyone just needs clear communications and clear structure to work within, to operate as best as they possibly can. And so that's where that feedback and that accountability comes in. Is, okay, as I'm going to define this for you, here's how it's going to be measured, so you know exactly what the expectation is. When we come back and, week over week, and we look at your numbers, these are the numbers that I care the most about. So we can have more efficient conversations. You can feel confident that you're doing the right thing. If there's any vague, areas in your project, you can fall back on that measurement rule and be like, okay, I know that I have to do something. I'm not sure what the definition is or what the right move is. If in the meantime, while I'm waiting on instruction, maybe for exact tactics, I can fall back on XYZ behavior, and I know that that's going to contribute in some way to the whole. So that
and also, we're bringing in you may be orchestrating in terms of bringing other people in terms of, if you're taking an AE and you're saying, okay, we're going to move the responsibility of that AE may need, excuse me, may need to be trained in something, either a new system or a new tool or a new process. And therefore what you're going to do is you may be bringing in sales operations sales enablement in to actually do that.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big roles of sales enablement, why you tend to move into a specialized function for that, at least at some more mature stages in the company, is that education and kind of the translation of information for in a way that people can use and understand requires a very specialized skill set. And a generalist that you have at the beginning of the company may not be the strongest player to do that. On top of that, prepping education plans and things like that and working with adult learners, that requires a lot of time investment to prep those things and to explore different ways to do that. But yeah, you mentioned AE training. A salesperson who gets it and is a top performer in the beginning, they need to continuously work, maybe not necessarily on sales tactics, but they're going to be retrained on any scaled tools that you bring in and introduce to the sales process to make their job easier in the theory. But also, anytime the product team is updating features and things like that, consultative selling and basically reputational sales of, I'm a prospect, I'm talking to someone, do they really know what they're talking about, and can I trust them?
Yeah.
That's so important. So they need to be re-educated. They need to speak in the language and in the terms that the prospects are expecting to hear. Yeah, it's extremely important to have that continuous improvement going.
So right at the beginning, before we came on air, I said something, and I don't want to embarrass you, Blake, but I actually said to you that you have a really good reputation in the marketplace. I got a lot of feedback. Well, Blake's he really knows his stuff. He's really helpful. So why is it, or how is it that you've got that? And is that important?
I think it's important. Personally, I mean, it aligns with my ideals, right? I make an extra effort for my own improvement to be proactive. And this is why I kind of played up those Slack communities. That's been a big source of this. I try to be proactive about looking for other professionals that are asking questions, in my area or in areas tangential to mine, and pushing myself to try and answer those questions. So if I don't know something, I don't necessarily go through certification courses on a regular basis or anything. That's not like what my schedule really looks like. Maybe at some point I'll do that. But that's how I prompt myself to continue learning, is people will ask these questions that sometimes I understand part of it. Sometimes I need to build up more knowledge. I do that research and then I go back and give them those answers and try and be of service in that way. I think that, staying engaged and really understanding what people are asking helps you understand what they care about. And it helps demonstrate that you're a good listener. And so that's why I think a lot of people maybe have positive feedback for me, but it's really convenient as well. And I would encourage anybody to try and do this, because as I go and answer those questions, like I said, I'm developing my own learning, but in some cases I develop, a finite answer, a definite answer. And I can develop a resource. Like some people have asked for like calculators and things like that. I'm like, oh, well, I'm good with Google Sheets and Excel and things like that. Let me try and put that in a formula format that anybody could use. And I've actually developed toolkits like that. And I have I'm thinking about translating it to the website, to a website environment and making it more accessible for the masses. But I have, a core RevOps guide of some functional definitions.
When we first talked, you said, I've got a core RevOps guide. It's on Google Sheets. I'll send you the link. And you did.
Yeah. And it's just a little network of, Google Docs and things that I've built up over time, and some presentations that, help set some precedent for common concepts, common problems that people ask about revenue operations, about business operations. And, I feel really proud about that. I'm glad that anytime I get that feedback too. I think a lot of professionals, it's important to identify your love languages, so to speak. I think there are those four. It's like acts of service, and I don't know. If for me, words of affirmation is a big thing. So anytime I get that feedback loop of like, wow, I really appreciate that. That just makes me feel good and it keeps me going.
Good. Good.
So I think it's a sense of motivation as well. Just, I'm professionally developing myself, but I'm also doing something that I enjoy and that I feel good about. So
good. Blake, thank you so much for coming on today and talking about us. I mean, you've got some amazing conversations that are going on in the chat. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your view of what is revenue operations. It's a fairly newish subject. One I'm sure is going to expand with time, but thanks for your insight today. And your Google Sheet, if people contact you, you'd be happy to share that with them, or?
Absolutely. The only thing I say is if you're going to share it somewhere else, give me some credit.
Give you credit, yeah.
But yeah, it's open and accessible for everybody.
Right.
Love to share that with people.
Great. And remind people where they can get hold of you.
LinkedIn would be the best place. I pay attention to LinkedIn very often. So connect with me, at the end of this call, or
and give a shout out to the RevOps Slack group again.
Yes, a RevOps Co-op is the name of it.
And you can find that, I think, by searching. I think they've actually set up a company on LinkedIn, haven't they?
They have their RevOps Co-op, all one word.com. They have their own website, and you can sign up from there and join the Slack community in that way.
Okay, good. Brilliant. Thank you so much for today, Blake. Thank you.
You got it. Thanks very much, Tim.
Thanks very much. Thanks.